Hi guys, this is Angela and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be drawing my favorite Studio Ghibli film. I have a collection of egg conte books by Miyazaki. Egg conte basically means storyboarding. Although my favorite Ghibli movie is directed by the talented Yoshifumi Kondo, it is storyboarded by Miyazaki based on the manga by Aoi Hiiragi. Whisper of the Heart is quite different from the many other well-known Ghibli films. This beautifully painted opening sequence introduces us to the realistic setting of Tokyo, Japan in the late 80s. It's just another hot summer in Tokyo, and the main character Shizuku is just another curious 14-year-old girl who has a great appreciation for books and writing. On her way to the library one day, she encountered a really chubby cute cat on the subway, and she followed the cat to an antique shop. This mysterious antique shop will eventually become her inspiration for her fantasy novel that she will dedicate all her time to writing. The shop owner's grandson, Seiji, goes to the same school as Shizuku. He is an aspiring violin maker. Seiji and Shizuku shares the same appreciation for the arts and dedication to their own crafts. As young creatives, they bond over the struggles of feeling somehow they're not good enough, as well as not being fully understood and supported by their families. My favorite thing about this movie is definitely the relationship between Shizuku and Seiji. And it's perfectly captured here in this scene. Seiji is taking Shizuku to see his secret spot, and while he is biking uphill, Shizuku feels Seiji struggling, gets off the bike and says, "I am no one's burden. I want to be helpful as well." As a young woman watching this movie in my college days, I was really inspired by Shizuku. In this final scene here, Seiji shows Shizuku his secret spot, and they admire the beautiful sunrise appearing in the sky, the sunlight lighting up all the buildings and the city before them. For me, these two characters' great aspiration to become masters of their craft is just as beautiful as this sunrise. Now for today's drawing session, I selected out 3 shots from this movie that really captured the art direction they went with in this movie. In the first shot, the sun has just risen above the cloud and is creating a warm glow. The radiating sunlight is hitting the edges of the clouds that's facing it. There is also a beautiful subtle rim light around the foreground buildings. Overall, the color palette around the sun is warm, and it gradually cools down as it gets further from the light. So I'm starting this drawing by circling the sun with the pale yellow, leaving the sun white in the center. Then I'm blending a yellow that's a bit saturated, so it reinforces the warmth coming from the sun. As I gradually move outwards, I'm transitioning to light orange and then light pink. Even though in the screenshot, the top of the sky is more of a pale green-bluish color, I decided to go with a much more vibrant and pastel-y pink color. So all I'm doing right now is make sure I have a very smooth radial gradient in the sky first, before I'm adding in the clouds. Once I'm happy with the top half of the painting, I'm adding in the clouds that's in the bottom half of the painting. I'm mostly using coral pink for the cloud, and for the center that's affected by the glow of the sun, I'm adding in a bit of light orange and pastel orange. For the very edge of the cloud, I'm adding in orange, so it seems darker and more saturated. As I move lower, I'm blending in pastel purple with the coral pink. For the buildings that are in the foreground, at first I tried using a darker purple, but the contrast was way too high, so I switched to blue-violet from Molotow. Occasionally, I'm creating some strokes that acts as fog, covering over the buildings. For the very few buildings closest to us, I'm using a darker purple, violet from Posca. Now I'm adding in some highlights, the rim lights around the buildings with pastel yellow from Artistro. Using the same pastel yellow to add the rim light against the cloud. At this point, I'm really not following the screenshot 100%. I'm more just looking at my drawing and evaluating what I need to add, or is it possible to eliminate some detail that I see from the screenshot. Now I'm using a pure white to add the radiating light coming from the sun. As it fades out, I'm adding in vanilla pastel at the very edge and then sometimes using my finger to blend it out. I'm using lilac pastel, pastel purple, as well as some skin pastel for the clouds that's closer to the sun. And for the clouds that are further away, I'm only using pastel purple and lilac pastel. Towards the end, I'm adding in some strokes that resemble the radiating light hitting past the clouds. This first drawing felt more like an exercise for me. I wasn't trying to copy what I saw in the screenshot. I was more just creating a drawing based on the screenshot, but more with my own colors and my own techniques. Moving on to the second drawing, we have some transmission towels against a sky before sunrise. We also see some apartment buildings as well as some dark foliage in the foreground. I decided to start this drawing by setting down the color and contrast for the apartment buildings, because not only will they touch the sky, they're also in contact with the foreground. I'm using sky blue for the side of the building that's not facing the light, and shock blue for the edge that's touching the sky. Next, I'm testing out the darkest dark in this drawing, which is in the foreground. I'm using navy blue to see how much of a contrast it creates against the apartment building. Within the navy blue, because I didn't want it to be so bland, I blended in some emerald green to represent the lighter foliage. As I move towards the left of the drawing, which is towards the sun, I'm transitioning the color to pastel green and then using emerald green as shadow. So there's 3 values in this foreground foliage: pastel green, emerald green, and navy blue. After I'm happy with the foreground, I'm moving towards the sky. I'm using light blue from Artistro, which is the lightest blue color that I have in all of my markers. And then for the top of the sky, I'm using light blue from Posca, which is more saturated, more blue, and darker. For the sky that's in the bottom left corner, which is more lit by the sun, at first I tested out pastel orange, but it didn't really work for me, so I changed to ivory from Posca, which is the new color that I got, and I liked how much contrast ivory created with pastel green. So I have the bottom left sky covered with ivory, and as we move upward, I want to make sure it can blend well with the light blue that I have. So then I'm blending in light orange. For the clouds in the sky, I'm using blue from Artistro, which is slightly darker than the sky color that I already have. For areas of cloud that I want it to be even darker, I'm blending in sky blue, which is the same color as the apartment building shadow. For the lighter clouds on the left, I'm using light blue, which is part of the mid-range sky color. I used pastel yellow to add the window glow in the apartments. And finally, I'm using extra fine tip markers from Artistro for the transmission towels in the foreground. I'm switching to a lighter blue as I move downward because it's against a lighter sky, so I want to make sure the contrast stays the same as in the screenshot. The transmission towel on the left is a bit faded because it's further from us. That's why I'm using a lighter blue color. And finally, I'm just using white extra fine tip marker to dot in some of the stars in the sky. Moving on to the last drawing, we have Seiji and Shizuku walking at night against Tokyo that's lit in the background. I found this shot particularly charming because not only do we see this really far distant city, we also see the houses that are closer to us. We have a really prominent light source, the street lamp. On the left, the light is glowing against the sky and it's lighting up the street light pole as well as some of the ground and the bush beside it. The key in this drawing would be to keep the contrast on the characters so they stand out against the background. I'm starting this drawing by testing out the darkest dark, which is the shadow portion of the street light pole on the left. Then I'm making sure I leave the light white and creating a glow around it. I'm using light blue for the bottom portion of the sky that's touching against the city. I'm also testing out the railing on the right, making sure that I have the right colors for it. Here I'm spending some time adding in the different shades of blue that's on the lit portion of the streetlight pole. Because it's so close to the light source, there's a great contrast between the lit portion and the shadow portion. And along the edge, where the shadow and light meet, there's a more saturated ultramarine blue color. At this point, I also needed to test out the color that I'm using for the characters. Seiji's jeans is actually quite important because not only does it need to create a contrast against the sky, it also needs to be lighter than the city. So I needed to test this out before I move forward. Same as usual, I'm using Sakura Pigma Micron 01 for tracing the black lines around the character. A black extra fine tip marker would also work, but because the characters are quite small, I needed a thinner black pen. So I'm just finishing up the characters so I know what colors I'm working against. Moving on to the house that's on the left, right behind the light pole. I want to make sure it's not too dark, and I would also leave out the window that's lit. Adding in the second light source that's in the background, but this light source really isn't that important because it's kind of blended in the city. The reason why I'm using a darker pen to trace the edge of the railing is because it's actually an animated element in this shot. All the background elements that's moving in a shot would have a black edge in traditional animation. So I wanted to honor the same detail that's in the screenshot and trace out the elements that has black borders. For the city in the background, I'm using sky blue for the edge and then shock blue, and for the bottom, I'm using a darker true blue. For the highlights in the background city, I'm first adding in a layer of light blue highlights. Light blue is light enough when it's against shock blue and true blue. Once I'm happy with everything else in the picture, I'm going in with the final highlights by using pastel yellow and white. I noticed I forgot the second light pole on the left, so I'm just adding that in with extra fine tip markers. What I liked about today's drawings is that instead of copying the screenshot stroke by stroke, I did a bit more experimentation myself, and I felt more freedom when I'm doing these studies when I can just rely on my own instincts. So I would recommend that to you as well. When you're doing these studies, try to mix in a bit of your own style and your own techniques instead of focusing on copying the original. I hope today's video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.